Well, he's one of the finest minds in medicine today. Dr. Siddhartha Mukherjee, oncologist and professor of medicine at Columbia University, New York, has a new book that's just been released today. It's The Song of the Cell, which looks at the very basis of our existence. Through the stories of real-life patients, Dr. Mukherjee takes us through an amazing journey of how human cells were discovered and how these are being used today to revolutionize medical treatments for diseases like cancer. His earlier book, The Emperor of Maladies, won a Pulitzer Prize and helped millions of cancer patients and their families around the world. Dr. Siddhartha Mukherjee joins us on NDTV now. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Mukherjee. You've done a great service actually writing books which explain complex medical issues to all of us, particularly cancer. And this book, The Song of the Cell, goes back to where it all begins, how all of us are made up of cells, how these were discovered, and how they're being used now in new treatments to treat diseases. How did the idea of writing about this come to you?
Well, after I finished my last book, The Gene, I began to think about how genes are made, are enlivened. A gene or a molecule of DNA is lifeless without the cell. It is just a molecule, it's a chemical. And my question really became, what happens at the next level of complexity? What is the next level of human complexity, of the complexity of the body? And so I really began to gravitate towards cells and cells as potential loci of therapy as I thought about how we might imagine the next sort of stage of our lives as, next level of medicine, as it were. And that's how I came about cells and cell therapy.
Well, you've written about what were once considered radical new technologies and the ethical debates that they sparked at that time. For instance, the first in vitro fertilization, the first stem cell transplants, etc. In other words, medicine and science keep evolving, and what we think is radical today becomes normal tomorrow.
Yeah, the great example is IVF. In vitro fertilization, hundreds of thousands of babies have been born with in vitro fertilization. But when it was first conceived, people thought that it was just unethical. That, lots of people thought that infertility is not a disease. And so therefore, why treat something that's not a disease? Now, the book makes a very radical distinction between disease and desire. That distinction is, of course, very important because people thought, oh gosh, we've been living with infertility, and some people don't think that it's a problem. They still don't think it's a problem. But for some other people, it's an aching form of suffering. So you have this question of, infertility and IVF. And when IVF was first conceived, a lot of people argued that it wasn't a disease and therefore should not be treated.
You're also passionately involved in a project here in India to make T-cell therapy for leukemia and lymphoma accessible for everyone. Now, there's a clinical trial which is underway on this. Tell us more about why this therapy is so important.
Well, it's a very radical therapy in which patients with relapsed refractory leukemia, these are leukemias that are no longer responsive to standard therapy, are treated with their own T cells. Those T cells are genetically modified in the laboratory and grown in the laboratory for 14 days and then returned back to the patients. It's very radical. It's very, in the United States, it's extremely expensive. It costs anywhere $500,000 to $600,000. We wanted to make that therapy available in India. I collaborated with Kiran Shaw and Kush Parmar, created an entire factory. This is not any kind of factory. This is not like a nuts and bolts factory. This is a place that has to be extremely sterile. And also the diseases that we're treating are very, very dangerous. These patients are almost at the edge of death. And the therapy itself is toxic. So you have to start off with the understanding that, the therapy itself can be potentially toxic and kill you. But if it's successful, we can cure about 70-80% of these patients who would otherwise be completely left without any options and die from the leukemia that they originally had. So we have started these trials. We are in midway, and I have to say that I can't tell you the results yet because, of course, we're still in the midway of these trials. But we are trying to provide the therapy for children, for kids. And there's nothing really like watching someone who's 10 years old with a lethal leukemia really come alive after the therapy. But as I said, I mean, these are not simple things to do. These are very toxic therapies, and there will be, of course, a certain number of toxicities associated with these therapies per se.
You've also written in this book about COVID, and very simply, you said that we have learned so much and yet we have so much left to learn. So what did COVID teach you?
Well, we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot about the immune system. It was very unanticipated. We've learned a lot about how COVID causes very severe disease. It was an incredible medical mystery. It still remains somewhat of a medical mystery, but we've learned how COVID causes this very severe disease, and it's by paralyzing some parts of the immune system while activating some other parts of the immune system. The virologist Akiko Iwasaki, who's a very famous virologist, calls it immunological misfiring. It's like an army that's firing in the wrong direction. And so we've learned a lot about COVID in that sense, but there are many, many medical mysteries that are still to be solved about how it evades the immune system, why you can have so many repeat infections, and so forth. So those are mysteries that we're still trying to solve. But, the creation of new vaccines against COVID and the possibility that we can actually immunize ourselves against this deadly virus has been a great learning experience for all of us.
What kind of treatments then are we looking at in the near future as far as cancer is concerned? You've talked about T-cell therapy, but are you more optimistic today about the kind of treatments that are available to people?
Absolutely, we are more optimistic. We're learning how to harness the human immune system against cancer, which is a very big step. This was not possible 10 years ago. Immunotherapy is now part of the standard protocol against cancer. My own laboratory is trying to use diets against cancer, to use not just diets in a prevention manner, but in a therapeutic manner against cancer. So we are trying very hard to understand how cancers depend on certain nutrients and harness those. We are learning how to prevent some kinds of cancers using ones that are caused by viruses, using new novel vaccines, and of course CAR-T or T-cell therapy. Now all of these are, as I said, they have costs that are associated with them because in cancer, unfortunately, nothing comes for free. And so we're also learning how to harness the toxicities against with these therapies for cancer. But there's a whole gamut of new therapies that everyone is involved in. The whole community of cancer researchers is involved in, and all of them are novel.
Why do you think, finally, Dr. Mukherjee, that it's important for you to write the way that you do, simplifying this, mystical world of science and medicine for all of us? Some of your peers have criticized you. They say you oversimplify things, but others believe you're doing an important service.
Well, I think it's important to simplify because it's impossible to read a 500-page book in which you talk about, CTLA4, BA 4.2, and so forth. I think that would become unreadable. No one would read it. No one would understand it. I think it's important because it gives patients and the public a kind of autonomy that is not otherwise available. I mean, imagine you were reading about economics and you had no clue about supply and demand, and you had no clue about the more complex aspects of economics. So, I try to reach what I think is the is a kind of balance between simplification, avoiding, and in this book especially, I've moved. There's a huge index and a huge epilogue and chapter after chapter afterwards, in which you can go into great depth. And I provide primary references where if you really are interested in deepening your knowledge about all of this, you can go in and deepen your knowledge. But I think the public, patients especially who are afflicted by these diseases, need to know what is going on and how to understand it, so that they can then therefore be able to understand what they're being treated with and how.
Well, the Song of the Cell is out today. Congratulations on that, Dr. Siddhartha Mukherjee. Thank you very much for joining us on NDTV. Thank you.